Nice to see you all. Illustrious panel and Brad Briscoe. Are you on this thing or not? Nice to see you. Thank you, Todd, whole Exponential crew for putting this on. We've been a part of the Exponential story for quite a while, and it's exciting to actually have this type of an event. So a little bit of our story recently. We've been doing micro-church missional community for about a quarter century. It's just been kind of a natural way that our family has had to live. Our son Ryan has had really severe epilepsy his whole life, and so we were never able to actually leave house and just do normal church and whatever. So we just had to learn how to live as missionaries where we just lived. And so that was the story. We followed Ryan out to a little town called Alton, Illinois, about 6 years ago. He was in an assisted living center out there, and so we would fly in just to kind of say hi to him. And each time we would go into this town, we just were sort of taken by the struggle of the city. It's a town just 20 minutes north of St. Louis. It's a little river town. If you fly into St. Louis, you go through Ferguson area, and then you go through a little delta, and then it pops into a little river town. And Alton used to be one of the richest cities in America in the 20s. It was a classic industrial town, lost most of its industry, and so by the time we started to sniff around, the average family income in Alton was about $22,000. Half of the homes were owned by slumlords, and all the normal inner city stats that you would get from the worst parts of St. Louis. And at one point, about 10 trips in, my wife said, hey, why don't we just sell the ranch in Denver, Colorado, and move here and see if we can do something to help the town, is the way she worded it. And we had planted several churches. We had never thought about like changing a town, but I was intrigued by that. We had a big family talk, and my 2 adult daughters and their husbands, we all moved together as a family for some mission to this town to do something to help out. And we didn't know what to do. We all bought homes right downtown, within a few blocks of each other, and we just started to pray, God, what would you do? Ask questions like, God, what would you plant here? Well, like, what would you start? We're supposed to bind and loosen things. Like, what do you want us to do here? And in short order, a gentleman that I barely knew took me on a tour of buildings that he owned around town, and he popped up in front of this old federal post office, and he said, what do you think about this? And I said, it's a very beautiful building. It had been boarded up for about 60 years. And he said, well, I feel like I'm supposed to give it to you, and I think you're going to know what to do to help our town, is the way that he worded it. And I just put those two together, and we just started to sniff around into a brand new vision, way beyond just the micro-church missional community model. And so we got our family in there, began to walk through the building, and my youngest daughter said, Dad, no brainer, why don't we just create the living room for the city? The town of 30,000 used to be 90,000, had no coffee shop, no daytime anything, so some biker bars at night. And so over the last 3 years, we've opened up a thing called Post Commons under an umbrella called the Lantern Network, which we bylawed as a charitable organization, not a church, even though we knew that God would build his church. And so we set out to create a kind of a network of businesses. We have 5 businesses, co-working, an event space. We're kind of the premier events spot for weddings. We've got an all-day brunch cafe, a coffee roastery, and so on. Some other businesses in the works. And we've only been at it about 3.5 years. And in that time, we've had the mayor come over, and he made a comment. He said, you guys got our town started. And I've had a few people tap on my shoulder at grocery stores and go, hey, are you Hugh Halter? And I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, like, your family has really done some cool things in our town. Had a woman walk by in front of our house after our son died a few months ago and just said, hey, I got to talk with your son a few times. Very beautiful boy. Sorry for your loss. And then as she began to walk away, she turned back around. She said, hey, just so you know, your family means a lot to the city. You guys have done a lot. That's just a little bit of a picture in a 3-year time span of building out this, what we call an apostolic hub, and seeing a little band of missionaries form. We just started to feel like we were barely getting anywhere, but somehow we were already having some impact on the town. And I want to share or give most of the time to Taylor and McCall, because when we were building this out, even though we had done quite a bit of church planting, I did not know how to build out an apostolic hub full of businesses and missional communities. And I found out about a group called Common Thread. Taylor and Lindsay McCall pioneered that out of Birmingham. And I heard that they were about 10 years down the road. And they began to coach us, and now are actually with us in Alton. But as Taylor and I began to look at the landscape of what's happening in the church in America, we realized there are many apostolic pioneer leaders that do want to build out what we call a kingdom ecosystem. And most of the time, they have nowhere to go for resource. So we're presenting to you Brave Cities as a network, a resource network, that will simply catalog the learnings of these ecosystems and just provide a resource and a coaching network for them. So I want Taylor to share a little bit more of their story. When people ask me, is there anything really new going on in the American church scene, I always go, this is the best thing I've seen and has the most legitimacy to what we would call building out kingdom ecosystems. So you have probably 2.5 minutes. So,
do my best. Yeah, thank you guys. So I'll share a little bit of my story, but basically what we're talking about is just a reimagining of church planting into building kingdom ecosystems. The phrase that Hugh used is seeing the church as a city within a city. I've always been obsessed with the kingdom of heaven, and not necessarily the place we will one day go, but the here and now, the good news of the here and now. What is it tactically? What is it tangibly? How can it touch people? How can it be real in front of us? So in 2011, I left 10 years in traditional ministry. We moved into downtown Birmingham with a little bit of a vision, some hope throughout the scriptures of what the church could look like functioning in an ecosystem. But we just kind of started moving slowly into building life in what we would call moving out of the fourth space into the first, second, and third space. And first space is where you live, your home, your neighborhood, where you're doing life in that way. Second space is where you work and learn, the market, education, schools, things like that. Third space being where you play, where you socialize, where your kind of fun rhythms are, where your social rhythms are, and how can we bring the ecclesial hope and the kingdom of heaven into those three spaces. I found that I was often hitting kind of the ceiling of the fourth space, if you know what I mean, that separate space. So over the next 10 years, we just desired to kind of build that innovative longing in the heart of the missionary. We've seen 20 plus businesses started that are held underneath our nonprofit. We've seen more than double that of missional innovative ventures and injustice works created in education spaces and in neighborhoods and out of homes, out of clusters of families living together in marginalized areas of Birmingham, all kind of with a common vision and a common thread, if you will, and held together by this economy, by this reign of Jesus and this culture and this vision. And so ultimately, Brave Cities is the effort to kind of build up and undergird that idea among other church planners that it can be more of a kingdom city within a city. And so I was leaving. This is a long story, but ultimately a year and a half ago, we felt like we were supposed to step away from Birmingham for a time. And one of my best friends in the world stepped into the role of leading the organization that we had started, the organization that serves our movement. And I had this beautiful kind of fortuitous meeting with our mayor that was totally unplanned. I went to get my car washed the day before we were leaving, and he was there in the neighborhood that he grew up in, getting his car washed at this same place. We had this neat encounter, and we started talking. He asked, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, we're actually moving to Alton, Illinois for a time to work with a friend there." And he looked at me, and kind of his mindset of leadership was, "Well, if you're leaving, is this thing stopping?" And I said, "Oh, no." He knew Nick, and I said, "This is what's happening. We're good." And he said, "Man, that's good to hear, because if you guys were to pull out, we'd have to raise taxes in our city." And I've loved that story over the years to really reflect with missionaries that when the righteous prosper, the city really does rejoice. And I don't think it's that we go to the city to change the city, if you feel me. I think it's that we build a city within the city. And when the righteous prosper in that city, the actual city does rejoice and begins to model and feel the weight of what's happening in those spaces. So Brave Cities is just a vision of bringing that dream and that kind of technology into the the practical and the technical of how to build cities within cities.